Hey friends, it's Melvin. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Here's just a few quick things I wanted to notify you guys about before we get started. First up, very soon, new episodes will be releasing Wednesday mornings rather than Tuesday. So don't panic if you don't see a new episode on Tuesday. Just wait a little longer and you'll see it in your feed. Second, we've introduced a mailbag. Check those show notes and toward the bottom you'll see a mailbag link. You'll then be able to text us any questions you might have about movies, the movie industry, or any movie/Christian related questions you might have. Then we'll respond in a future episode, so send us your questions now. Up next, Patreon polls, which are available to Patreon supporters at the $3 tier or higher, have been updated. Supporters can now suggest films or shows to be reviewed at the end of each month. The two most liked submissions will become the options for the Patreon poll, so if you want to hear us talk about your favorite movie or show, join our Patreon and start campaigning. And lastly, whether you're a new or longtime listener, please consider writing a review or rating the Cinematic Doctrine podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Apart from financially supporting on Patreon, these are the two most helpful ways to support the show. And that's it. Enjoy the episode. You're listening to Cinematic Doctrine. Okay, if you just press play, guys, you are missing out on 30 minutes of me talking with our guest here, Jerry Dugan, from Beyond the Rut. I'll introduce him in a second, but again, you get to hear 30 minutes of us talking about his podcast, his favorite episodes, difficult moments, and just the concept of the subject matter they cover is more valuable than us talking about movies. So I was really curious to hear about, what's the stress that can come with that. And then he was able to share two of his favorite stories that have come from the show. We basically did an episode of his show, but on my show, because I've always found interview podcasts very, 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 very edifying. So, support on Patreon for $3 a month and you get access to early uncut episodes, just like this episode. You also get to influence the show, a couple other things too. You'll hear those peppered throughout the episode with some little call to actions, very quickies, but it's really worth it. I think so. And we just keep coming out with new content that's available for you. $3 a month. We don't lock it off for higher prices. But let's get to know our guest here real quick. Jerry Dugan, how are you? What's going on? I'm doing
great. I'm doing great, Mel. Thank you so much.
I always suspect that the introduction is the most awkward part of our show because we do it twice. And I never will not mention that because I find it so fascinating. Why don't you tell us about your podcast real quick, and then we'll get an avatar.
Yeah. So I'm the host of Beyond the Rut podcast, and it's a show that shares encouraging stories and practical advice to help pull you out of your rut and help you find success in the areas of your faith, your family, your fitness, finances, and future possibility. So it's geared towards Christian men in the 30s and 40s, married, they've got kids, all the boxes checked of what success should look like, but just feel stuck in some area.
Hopefully we won't run out of steam here. I mean, we are talking about a 3-hour and 12-minute movie, but I think we'll have a good pace, just like the movie itself. Before we actually introduce Avatar 2, you said you're a particular fan of Cameron and that he has some of your favorite sci-fi movies in him. So did you want to talk about Cameron a bit? Tell us what you like about him. What's his style?
Yeah, I would definitely say after seeing Avatar: The Way of Water, he has come a long way since Piranha 2.
Yes. Classic.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh geez. Yeah, I had to watch the trailer for that before we got on here, just because I was like, I'm going to bring that up because I never got to see it because I was like, oh geez, I was 5 when that movie came out. 1981, guys. Wow.
Yeah, Cameron's been working for a long time.
Oh, he has. But I wouldn't say that's one of my favorites because I mean I have to see it to say it's my favorite. But he's the guy behind Terminator and Terminator 2: Judgment Day. He's the guy behind Aliens, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. There are only a few movies I can quote from beginning to end, and Aliens 2 was one of them. Spaceballs is the other.
Good. Nice.
Right? In fact, the whole time you and I have been talking together, Mel, I've been throwing in Spaceballs quotes left and right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Patreon supporters, write them down. Figure them out. Bonus episode.
And a couple of Three Amigos, but that's not a James Cameron movie.
But that's also a good one.
Oh man, but favorite aliens dialogue though has nothing to do with any of the action though. It's just like, that's it, man. Game over. Now what are we supposed to do? And then Paul
Yeah,
Reiser comes.
it's
He's
all
like,
silly
maybe
stuff.
we build a campfire, sing a few songs. It'll be fun. It's like it's in the
really
background.
Good banter. His stuff is
Oh.
great.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was a good one. And then The Abyss was another movie I saw growing up. And then Titanic, my wife's favorite movie, Titanic. Flipping through channels is sometimes scary because the moment that movie comes on, that's it. Doesn't matter what you were searching for. My wife
Stuck.
She's going to watch that movie with or without you. And it's like, oh man, why can't they put aliens on more often? But I loved Avatar, the original one, because I saw it with my son in theater in IMAX, I believe, 3D. He was 8 at the time. And just everything James Cameron does, he's looking for pushing the envelope with technology. So it's, I guess, very Disney-esque in that sense. Like, I want to do this, but the technology to produce it doesn't exist yet. So I'll wait a little bit longer for that. So like just what he did with 3D with Avatar, the original movie, really pushed the envelope, because what 3D was all about, like having things jump out at you.
Yeah, like Friday the 13th Part 3 was like a ping pong battle.
Right.
And like, yeah, you had Spy Kids 3D a couple years ago that were just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it was like still fun because Robert Rodriguez is a silly guy, and Cameron obviously likes him too. And so they like to just kind of test with technology. But yeah, Cameron seems to use technology to be a bit more grounded and I wouldn't say realistic, because movies aren't realistic, but it's definitely much more, I would say, suspension of disbelief when he does it. And it's good. Like, it's really good.
Yes. Like, seeing Avatar in 3D way back when, it was more about depth. Like, he went the other way. It's like 3D isn't just about coming out at you.
Yes.
Go inwards into the screen so you feel like you could almost get to that point that's in the background. Yes. And I love that. I mean, it's just, I remember my son and I just sort of swatting at the bugs in the theater, and we realized, oh, that's not out here. And it blew our minds. And that's just the way he's always been. Like, Alien was a really good movie by itself. That was directed by Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And then James Cameron takes over for the sequel. And I've talked with folks who saw both in theater, and they said that when they saw Alien, the original Alien in the 70s, they were just like scared. They're like, man, they're looking up at the ceiling tiles. Like, is anything going to come out and get me? And then, 1986 Aliens comes out, and they go to see it. And they said that was an intense war movie. Like, it wasn't just a horror movie. It was a war movie, and it was Marines versus aliens. And it was just an intense roller coaster of emotion and adventure. And so that's what he typically brings to the screen.
Yeah, there's some interesting, I remember watching a couple of videos on Titanic a couple of years ago, and someone proposed, because they were specifically going through adaptions of Titanic, and they were talking about how Cameron's, apart from being the wildly successful movie that it was, brought up how out of all the adaptions, Cameron's is actually one of the more simple in terms of its characters, but his ability for spectacle in the filmmaking medium is so extravagant and so exciting and so spectacular that you kind of need these simple characters, because otherwise you'll get muddled and it'll get in the way of the whole package he's trying to provide. And when we're talking here, I'm actually reflecting that he must really like adventures, because he really wants to have, like, drop in a couple characters, don't make them too complicated, but give them different traits that separate them, and then send them on the same path and kind of see how they'll reach point B, which you kind of already know, like, like how they'll succeed or whatever, but you want to figure out how they're going to make it or who will make it in the end. Yeah, it's impressive, especially like the consistency of his style, and to essentially go into Avatar 2, a property that's kind of, I wouldn't say invaluable, as some articles will say online. I mean, that's been the discussion for all years. Like, does Avatar matter? It's like, no, it matters. It's just, does it have a permanence and cultural response, and will it have impact? And I think, obviously, that's still up for debate. The movie just came out. I saw it Friday, but it is very good. And I am curious to see his streak continue with this, with this ability for adventure. You may not know this, but the easiest way you can show your support for Cinematic Doctrine is to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. So press pause and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And then press play again so you can hear the rest of the show. But I guess that's a good enough transition, if any, for going into the plot of the movie, which I'll just quickly summarize. So following the events of the first film, it's been a couple of years now. Jake Sully and Neytiri have a couple children. I do apologize. I got into the movie about 10 seconds late. So I was a little confused at first when they talked about 4 children. And then later on, it's alluded that one of them is actually adopted. So it's 3 native borns and 1 adopted with a mysterious past. Try and name another franchise where they do that all the time. But it's simple. Cameron's simple and he makes it fun and adventure. It's really good. And things have been great. They've really just been able to have their family and live together. And they do a cheesy photo op, which I thought was really great, where everything's like faded out and their eyes are glowing. That was really good. And then the humans return, the Sky People, and a very intimidating landing sequence that looked like a Denis Villeneuve movie. It felt like Dune, frankly.
It really did, yeah.
It was super cool. I mean, that alone was like, okay, we're in for a good ride. Like, this is some good visuals. Then the plot kind of begins. We're introduced to... Yes, Scott Lang, his character is back. Let me just scroll up again so I can get that name. Stephen Lang. Scott Lang is from, that's a name from something else.
Oh, man.
Ant-Man. Thank you, my wife.
Oh, yes.
Right there.
The main character.
I've been saying Scott Lang the whole time. for 3 days. Stephen Lang's character, let's go ahead and get his name. Miles Quaritch. He, of course, died in the previous film, but he is revived as an avatar. And this is the best setup, I think, of the film. He is the avatar with the memories of Lang's character before he died. And it sets up that he's the same, but different. And that's exactly what I want from clones in science fiction. And it makes for a very compelling character. And as the plot progresses, we'll watch as Stephen Lang's Quaritch, Commander Quaritch, is introduced to his long lost son. So I guess that's right. There's a 5th child, two adopted children and 3 native children. One of his children is left on Pandora, and he meets them. And then Sam Worthington. There's just so many names. I even have the list here, and it's like I'm catching them all. Also, as listeners will know, usually Dan introduces movies. That's no excuse, but here we are. Jake Sully realizes that with the return of the Sky People and Stephen Lang's character, also a danger, they have to escape. And so the whole film really has a lot of themes of family, a lot with water, although those I would frankly say are less developed than the family stuff, which I liked a lot more. We conferred before the recording that there's not a whole lot to spoil with this movie, but don't worry, we won't get into much. We'll talk about vague things here and there, and then at some point I'll make it clear that we're going to go into spoilers, but we wanted to talk about Cameron, which we did, and now we're going to talk about story and character for a bit, and we'll save CGI for the end. But first off, Jerry, what did you think of Avatar 2?
But I loved it. It was because I was a little concerned, like, how do you build off the first one?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And, everybody has taken and adopted a lot of his best practices. Like I mentioned earlier, he took 3D and he went depth with it instead of things coming out at you. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody started doing that. Dune, the 2021 version went very epic. So how do you one up that? And it's just like, he found a way. He did it. And there were just times where my wife and I were just so mesmerized. And my wife does not like science fiction, and she loved this movie, Avatar, The Way of Water.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed it. I've said on the podcast before, in fact, when this trailer came out a couple months ago before Doctor Strange, people on the podcast know I was not excited for Avatar 2, mostly because as a person who watches a ton of movies, I was really intimidated by the fact that we were introducing essentially another franchise to keep up with. And I'm just, as listeners know, I'm exhausted of Marvel and superheroes right now. We had a brief Patreon discussion on the Guardians holiday special in our last episode for Knives Out. It was good, but I throw my hands up in the air. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just getting tired of this stuff. And so I was really intimidated about this. And then I saw Avatar re-released in theaters a couple months ago.
And it was awesome. I had not seen the movie for years. I really enjoyed it. Caught it in a Dolby screening. It was not 3D. I wish it was. And my only criticism really was the variable frame rate. I was not a fan of switching between 48 frames and 24. That again happens here with Avatar 2, but it's much more consistently 48. And when it is 48, it's really good. In fact, the action sequences, I got to say, are greatly improved by being 48 frames per second. I can see what's happening and it has more impact. Really love that. And we'll definitely talk about action because this movie, the only thing I heard about the movie before seeing it is it's like an 80s exploitation violent movie. And I was like, what? That is crazy. I can't wait to see this. And it basically starts and ends that way. It really ends that way, but it's a lot of talking for a while and then boom, it's awesome stuff, but really good cheers in the theater. But yeah, I saw, Avatar and I was like, this is impressive. It's a really good adventure movie. It feels great. The CGI felt tactile. My criticism this year of CG, and even last year when we saw Shang-Chi, I was like, this CG feels so fake and it just isn't good. And it's the Mandalorian dome. Nothing's real. And here we are, Avatar 2. And from the start, it's CG and all of it feels tactile, real. It literally feels like James Cameron, didn't build a set, but like another planet for us to just go to and shoot scenes on. And it's impressive stuff. I was really happy with that. And that helps, in my opinion, the story, because I'm not as distracted by effects. I'm not as distracted. I'm actually more comfortably settled into the effects. And like you said, it's such a good point to bring up, but that in Avatar, Cameron uses depth. And I do want to mention my Dolby screening. I didn't know this, but it was 3D. When we got there, they gave us glasses like, wow, great, this is awesome. But you mentioned that they use depth as opposed to, depth inwardly as opposed to towards us or outwardly. There were a lot of scenes in here where they cleverly used that. The one that most impressed me, it's sort of silly, but it was a scene later in the film. They set up that because the sun, during this particular season, the sun goes past the planet that's next to them because Pandora is the moon. So they call it the eclipse time of the day. And it's set up that it's darker. And usually that's in visual terms, things are going to get real. And something real just happened. A character looks up and we see off the reflection of his visor that the eclipse is about to happen. And there's just so much depth and realism to the visual. It blew me away. And I thought that was so impressive that Cameron correlated his ability to tell story with his visuals and CG, which sounds like a no-brainer to say out loud, especially when Steven Spielberg did it with Jurassic Park in the 1990s. But we're in 2022 and there's so much visual muck out there, and to just see a full 3-hour 12-minute movie where everything's visual effects just seems so tangible. I don't know, it made my heart feel good.
There were moments in that movie where James Cameron's done some documentaries. He's a big avid historical buff when it comes to the Titanic, so he's done documentaries on hunting for the Titanic, and the movie Titanic, he had tried to recreate as much of the realism, the historical fact as he could through the movie. There were moments in watching Avatar 2 where I forgot I was watching a world that was created by computers. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was watching more of a James Cameron documentary of hunting for Titanic, and watching a wildlife special. And I was just drawn in and mesmerized by it. And I shared that with my wife after we watched it. She said, me too. I felt that way, and not in a bad way. We were there for it. If Quaritch never came back and never found them again, we kind of didn't care. We wanted to see more.
Just live here.
Yeah, the effort to build that world, the islands and the way of water. Really, we were there for that, and it was just this is mesmerizing. I love it. The scope, the scale, the detail, the realism to it. I believe this is an actual world. That's how effective he pulled that off for me. So I loved it.
This is definitely, I was not expecting to enjoy it so much, but there was as listeners will know, I'm very easy to manipulate emotionally with movies. If something I find impressive or beautiful, it just makes me tear up. And this movie, for the first hour, I was just so impressed by the visual prowess and the music and the story setups and everything. I found like there's just so many clever choices here. There's an argument in the beginning of the film between Jake and Neytiri, and they're arguing about whether or not they're going to leave their tribe and go escape, because Jake himself is like, no, protecting my family from Quaritch is more important than protecting the tribe. You guys are my fortress. It's the lines from the trailer. But instead of just it being a shot reverse shot, which could have been done, it's shot from the angle of, I believe, Took in particular, like hiding. The shot is like the camera's under the tent, lifting it up so you can see from the angle of a child. And it just, you feel like you're not supposed to hear this, and it sets up, and you're really not, because it's a private interaction between these parents, and that alone tells you something about the parents' dynamics, the family dynamics. And I was especially impressed by the fact that like one of the criticisms of the first movie is that the characters are very simple. Although I do think Jake is a pretty complicated character, even if he is a carbon copy of every pulp fiction protagonist of every paperback ever written. But he is pretty complicated, and I like that. And in this one, they are all way more complicated in their simplicity, because Jake is really just a dad, and Neytiri's a mom, and also a monster, but mostly a mom. And all the kids are very simple. My wife and I, we joked that Sigourney Weaver's character, who is different this time, she mocaps for a teenager and voices for a teenager, and she does it just fine. Kat was like, I can't get past the fact that that's a 70-year-old woman. But for me, I was fine. But Kiri, she's essentially online. There's a joke about the female character with magic powers is called the Special. And they are the one character who has fairy powers and everyone else is normal. And that's a very simple trope that's usually avoided in storytelling now because it's so criticized. And yet here it's done super well. And Kiri is extremely charismatic. And the visuals from it are really interesting. And it's exciting. Like, you're really waiting to see her. Like, how does she use this power that she seems to have with Eywa? It's really interesting. And I don't know. I think I'm just refreshed by this movie, because it's also like it's silly to call it a franchise movie, right? This is the sequel to a movie from over 10 years ago. Yeah. But it's just really refreshing to watch a film that has so much care and intent and direction. Like, this is a really well directed movie. And that's just so different from, I think, what I'm used to, which is the constant Marvel DC machine popping things out. And frankly, Disney machine with their live actions. And even in the indie sphere, there's not a lot of movies with this well directed. So I'm just, this is a good movie, guys. You should go out and see it. Just saying.
Enjoying this episode? Grab that share link and tell your friends. Word of mouth is the most effective way for a podcast to reach new listeners, so don't be shy. Share the episode wherever you can.
The intentionality that you brought up earlier about the of Took, the youngest child of the four, eavesdropping on mom and dad basically having an argument about the fate of the family. One of the big themes of the movie is family. What defines family? What do you go to do to protect your family? What helps your family thrive? When do you lift your children up and like release them to go be adults? And just a scene like that, taking the time to animate it from Took's perspective of eavesdropping and bringing us all alongside of the child. We're all eavesdropping with her on mom and dad having this argument. That says so much about the theme of family, and that this story isn't just about Jake Sully on another adventure. This is the whole family is together, and we're seeing this from a family member's perspective. And so that intentionality is really huge, that, the story isn't just Jake Sully. It's, we're learning from Loak. We're learning from the oldest son. We're learning from Kiri. And then, you mentioned, Kiri's, so Sigourney Weaver's character's, powers. It deepens the understanding of Eywa and the character of Eywa without just like going into exposition. Like, you get to see it.
Thank goodness.
Yes. Oh man. And, it just really well done. A lot of detail there. I think more of this is going to be like explained through storytelling as we go into the subsequent sequels of
Yes,
3,
yeah.
4, and 5, it's going to make a lot more sense. So I just love that it did a lot of world building, a lot of storytelling through visuals. Even though the characters probably are simplistic, they're relatable. Like, it's not too outlandish. Like, I would do almost anything to, protect my family.
These are,
how many
it's
of us
reasonable.
like how many of us have relocated our home just so that we have a better job to provide for our family and provide a safer environment, a better school. That is essentially what Jake Sully and Neytiri are doing.
And that's without somebody trying to kill us.
Yes. They just had to have a little bit higher motivation, I guess. They were too comfortable in their comfort zone.
And I was thinking about this, where one of the kind of jokes leading up to this film was that the second trailer dropped right when, maybe it was the third trailer. The last trailer came out with Black Panther 2, and it was right before the film started, which, of course, Black Panther is about Wakanda versus the Namorians. I forget what that town, Talokan, the underwater sea people.
Oh, okay.
And it's a big movie about a lot of water stuff, and there's a ton of and one of the jokes online was like, it was not fair to show the Avatar 2 trailer before this movie, where you're going to see visuals that just do not compare. And of course, it's true. But something else I found interesting is that, like, here again, we're seeing a director who has the ability to take one scene and use much more dynamic storytelling. One of my criticisms of Black Panther 2 was that every scene has one purpose, where two people just talk about one subject matter. There's never any lines that are clever allusions to something else. Like, let's say, oh, you know what? It's like Batman Hush. In Batman Hush, there's a scene where Batman is aware of this villain named Hush. And at the end of the story, Catwoman, during an interaction, just says Hush, but just to say, like, be quiet. But Batman gets frightened because he's now thinking maybe Catwoman was in on the whole thing. And only Batman knows about that particular part. Catwoman's not aware. But that scene is dynamic because it's an interaction between them that's romantic. It's destructive because of Batman's trauma and experience. It's multi-layered, and it tells you more about the characters. And the entirety of Black Panther 2 was just singular purpose. And here, Cameron really is multifaceted. It's really, really impressive. And every scene impressively flows into the next. A big worry about this movie is it's 3 hours and 12 minutes. That's a fair worry, because there's been a lot of movies this year over 2 hours that are not worthy of 2 hours. And yet here the pace is impressive. I was curious. Did you feel the 3 hour wait time? I feel like most people would, but this, did you feel that?
I did not. Even the whole world building of, like, getting to know that island chain and see the family learn how to live with this village, just when it's starting to feel like, okay, whatever happened to that colonel guy who's trying to kill them, bam,
boom.
Like,
yes,
now that storyline is building, and not to give away anything, but you see how they're preparing for what's coming next, and you're just like, yes, and it just starts to build up tempo from there. And but yeah, time wise, it did not feel like 3 hours and some change. It went by very quickly. It felt just right, I would say.
It's deceptive. I actually just wanted to watch more, and this is like like a Clockwork Orange situation where, like, my eyes could have been open, but it's the opposite, where I'd actually enjoy it and I want more and I want more, because, like, this was, like, really like, it's so well paced. It's so exciting. It's so fun. The only low point, there's a scene in the middle. Is it the middle? Maybe it's like the beginning of the third act. There's a scene where they showcase what whaling looks like on Pandora.
Yeah.
And it's really the only scene where I kind of was like, this seems the most furthest from the urgency of the story. Of course, then it sets up the final showcase of the film and what makes that important. And it ultimately pays off well. But even then, like, it's a visually really enjoyable scene. It's exciting. If you're a fan of sci-fi, you like technology in movies. And so you're going to really enjoy some silly mechs that are in here. Cameron is an admitted fan of anime, and you get to see his love of anime throughout all of this movie, and even down to some tropes that are, like, just purposely tearjerkers in anime. They happen in here. It's really good. But otherwise, like, I didn't feel that length. Avengers Endgame, I felt that was 3 hours. But this, not at all.
Yeah, I was going to say the whole ecology conservation message was pretty strong. in this.
Very. I didn't even know. What are you talking about? Ecology? What? Yeah, it's very present, and it's funny because it's not even Earth, so it's like they've barely impacted this planet. But you're getting that when you come off of Avatar 1, which is intensely ecologist. I don't know what you would call it. Green. It's a very green movie. Hey there, listener. Want to influence the podcast? Head on over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and support the show for $3 a month. In doing so, you'll be able to vote on a movie poll that picks a film we discuss each month. So jump on over there and have your voice heard. So CG, I wanted to talk about this more specifically, and I wanted to hear, everybody knows I'm mid about CG. I love special effects, practical stuff. How are you a fan of CG or practical, or do you have a preference?
Yeah, when it comes to CG, it depends on how it's done. Like the way it was done in Avatar 2, I'm all for it. The way it was done in the original Avatar, I'm all for it. Where I hate CG being used, and I don't know if it has a specific term, but I call it like the CGI swarm. And I think it's just the laziest way to do anything with CGI. And it's just, I think when I first saw it was, Lost in Space with Matt LeBlanc and Heather Graham back in the late 90s.
Okay.
Give or take. And, they're out there, they're exploring space. I'm loving everything they're doing. And all of a sudden they come across the enemy, which is this swarm of robot spiders. Mm-hmm. And it's just ridiculously overwhelming. There's no way they're going to take on these spiders. They're only armed with Matt LeBlanc and a space rifle. And he's somehow keeping this swarm of robot spiders at bay. And it's too fast. There's too many of them. There's really no way. They all should have just died 20, 30 minutes into the movie. The end. But you see it in almost every movie. Hellboy, not the most recent one, but the first one that came out. Yeah. Those little tiny animals that come out, and they're just a swarm of them. We talked about Black Panther. You were talking about the sequel, but the original one, where it's just a swarm of aliens hitting the open field. And it's just, we seem to just easily try to, I guess, get people pumped up with this swarm of enemy, the swarm of something coming to get you. And it's just an overwhelming thing. And that just drives me nuts. I hate that. It's just there's no way anything moves that quickly or that believably. And you just kind of swarm the screen with, World War Z, all the zombies trying to climb the wall or go through Jerusalem. I'm like, you ruined the movie.
yeah. I was thinking of Star Trek Not Into Darkness, the third one, Beyond.
Yes.
And when the Enterprise is attacked, it's attacked by a swarm-based, kamikaze-like machines. Moonfall this year, which was delightful, but it was absurd.
But
the classic Roland Emmerich movie, Moonfall. That is another one of these swarm equivalent things where it's like a space. I would almost say amoeba. That's kind of what they make them look like.
Yes.
And it's probably easy to animate in theory because you have so much going on, visual vomit, that you're not seeing that there's a couple that might not be moving at all, or having any dynamic nature to it. Or you, I don't know, collect it into a layer and you just twist it, which oftentimes they do in these visuals. And yeah, I often find that it seems that a lot of directors are using CG lately as sort of a catch up, or we'll fix it later, or which is bizarre because CG, if my understanding, someone let me know if I'm wrong, is usually made alongside the movie because it takes such a long time and you're working with so many different studios, so that if you shoot something and then you find something didn't work, you're then going to these studios you're working with and going, hey, you got to change this. And they're going, hey, I got 6 weeks left. What do you want me to do? I've been doing this for 4 months. And so here, Avatar clearly seems to be something where Cameron, I'm sure he didn't work on this constantly for 13, 14 years. I'm pretty sure he wanted to make that Alita movie, but then he gave it to Rodriguez at some point, which I like that movie. I think it's pretty good. But you have somebody here who, from intent, it seems, knew what he wanted to do from the beginning and then ran with it. And it's It's something that kind of, I don't know. I've already said it, but it feels better and it feels more confident. I think that's why, like, I feel confident also saying like this is a well-directed movie, is because the director is there from the whole process, pre-production, production, post-production, and he correlated with a whole team and confidently moved forward. Whereas, yeah, I remember listening to an interview or discussion about Shang-Chi, and there's that, it's in the trailer where he's fighting on the bus and he kind of does like, I'm doing the hand motion where he does like a pose and he's on the bus standing, and then behind him is the bus moving and it's like a tunnel. And he specifically said he did that going into the tunnel because even though a tunnel would never be that long, it helps you focus your attention forward onto Shang-Chi's face in the center. And I've always just thought, like, even before he said that, I was like, that shot's ugly. I think that shot's ugly. The colors are muted and dimmed. And here he is explaining that he had intent. And I feel like what's happening is there's so much a lack of direction and intent where they are doing things with purpose. It just ends up being the wrong purpose, and it just feels good, to watch Avatar, where it's very clear that like Cameron, I'm sure he's benefited here in his animation by all of the special effects he's done in the past, where he probably treats, I'm just theorizing, he probably treats CGI and special effects like he does practical. And he's only making corrections or amendments where practical couldn't work, as opposed to a lot of directors nowadays are using CG where practical could work. I didn't have much to say about that. It was just that. But yes. I don't know. I keep thinking about this topic, special effects and CG, because it's in everything now. And sometimes I see it worked really well. Dark Crystal Age of Resistance did it well, where most of it's practical with the puppets, and then they slightly changed some reactions in CG. And then I've seen some really shocking stuff like Sonic 2 literally looking unfinished. And, I like that movie, but it's pretty unfinished.
Yeah, I hate it when CGI is used or CG is used just as a crutch, or, to defy the laws of gravity. Somebody all of a sudden can, jump off a 100-story building, land inside a vehicle. That vehicle just happens to, I don't know, let's say it's a car, drive on air and land on the roof of another car. And it's like, even if that were done practically, it would not work. The car would just crash with the guy in it. In fact, laws of physics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your ability to believe it kind of is harder.
Yes.
So it gets messy.
So that to me, like, it's got to have some grounding in reality to make the unbelievable believable. And I think that's where CGI comes in. It's like, Lieutenant Dang from Forrest Gump.
Yeah. With just the ability for them to do the light special effect with his legs is impressive. I think the thing, as we're talking about this, the thing that I want to do is when I watch a movie is like I would if I went to a magic show. I would want to go, how did they do that? And if it's as simple as saying, oh, they just CG'd in post, that's not as interesting as like, I mean, Avatar 2 is impressive to the point where the CG is, they didn't see. But how did they do that, right? Like I said to Kat, I was like, there's so much positional awareness in this film that is already ostensibly difficult for many directors to do in a real location, to be creative with how you do shots and stuff. And here Cameron is like the place isn't even real.
Yes.
And he's able to put his camera at a place that's fascinating. And you go, what the heck? How do you do that?
How do they get the whales to do like motion capture?
Yeah, what the heck? Which, speaking of, we didn't talk about the whales, but they are one of the best parts of the movie. It got a good laugh and awe out of us. There's a scene, I can't remember the character, but it's the youngest son. He's talking to this one whale, who we later learn is kind of an outcast. And he asks, like, why are you an outcast? And they haven't done this yet, but they subtitle the whale and it just says, it's too sad, I can't tell you. And it's just so adorable. My wife and I both audibly went, that's so cute.
And it's funny, like that happened. I'm like, what the heck? How did, what?
They talk now. Okay.
But it makes sense later on. You're like, they got that
so good
connection. Yeah.
Which kind of is, that's such an anime thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, and I almost can tell, like, Cameron probably was like, it'll be so funny, but it'll be so cute and it'll be great because then we could do stuff later with it. And that's just so much confidence, and you can feel confidence with a movie, and this one is one of those. So it's a good movie.
Yes.
But yeah, I want to look and go, how did they do that? And that's when we watched Darkman this year is the first time we checked it out. Sam Raimi, it's very good. And there's so much constant stuff with the practical effects that make me go, how did they do that? Including a scene, you talked about jumping off a roof with like a car, but like there's just a scene where someone jumps out of, or is pushed out of a window. And I'm like, that's a real person. How'd they do that? Like it's a really high building. What did they do to do this? And of course they don't show them land because, practical effects, you do stuff, but it's still like, whoa, that's a real person. And I want to do that when I go to the movies because that's what it's a show. I'm putting on a show. And so it's something where I'm just desperate for tangibility. I want to feel it. I can feel those whales. I can feel that water, which the effects here with this water is wicked good.
Yes.
It's a impressive movie.
Well, people laughed. Like James Cameron said that he was waiting for the technology to come along with computing that he could recreate water. And people were like, why do you need a computer to generate water?
This.
Yes.
It's crazy. I just like, there's so many scenes when I think about it. You mentioned Cameron feeling like this is him taking all of his talents and doing it. And there's scenes later in the film that look just like Titanic. They feel just like Titanic. They move just like Titanic. It's the water pushing through the hallways just like Titanic. And unlike Titanic, where you can make a miniature, put a compound in the water, have it go through, and it looks like the size looks correct. Here, like if he wants to have a different type of tension, such as people running away from water, like he has in this situation, I don't know how you do it without really good looking technology. And there's maybe like one scene, Kat and I agreed, like look like a cutscene from a video game. But it's like such a quick shot that it's like, okay, you earned one mistake. Like 3 hours, that's a pretty good like percentage of success. I think I read the same thing about Avatar 1, that he had the idea in the 90s and they were like, we can't do this. And he's like, okay, I'll wait. Like, I'll just do it later. So.
Hey. We have some Patreon goals we're trying to reach. If we get enough support, we'll review each God's Not Dead movie, as well as The Inhumans, that really bad Marvel show from a couple years ago. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and share your support.
So so we can't talk about a franchise film without predictions. What do you think is going to happen next? Where do you think this movie's going to, we didn't do spoiler. We're definitely talking about spoilers now, guys. If you have tuned in, you heard the movie, you know what it's about. That's a sizable chunk. That's 40 minutes of talking about the film. You know what's going on, but we want to talk about what we think is going to happen next. Check out the movie if you haven't already. Got a ticket. Definitely see it in 3D. I, of course, am a Dolby stan. Go see it in Dolby, but it sounds like IMAX is definitely worth it still too. We are getting to spoilers. Let's talk about spoilers and let's get into what we think is going to happen next.
Spoilers, America. Wait.
It's a good censor. It was pretty good. I guess I'll have you back on. We'll talk about Team America. We'll do that movie too.
Man.
I'll just put it out there, listeners. We're not doing Team America. We will not be talking about that movie, but yeah. So I guess, do you want to explain kind of how this movie wraps up, and then we'll get into predictions?
Yeah. Well, of course, there's a battle because you
gotta have one.
It's a James Cameron movie,
and it's awesome.
Yes, they didn't create Avatar recreated soldiers for nothing. They had to have a coming together and clash. And so in the end, though, like Jake Sully's family becomes part of the Water People. They're the Water Tribe. I forget the exact name, but they said, you are part of us. Without giving away too much, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but it ends with Jake Sully saying that this is our home. We gotta fight. This is where we make our stand. And then he does the eyes opening thing, same way they closed the first movie.
That's right. Yes.
So I think the third movie is going to be just that. It's going to be the fight. It's we've got the whole clash of like the scientists who, like, that was kind of a very I don't know what the phrase
underutilized
is.
section.
Yes,
Are you talking about the how Dr. Gavin. I'm seeing this is the only reason I'm getting the name. I have IMDb open, but Jermaine Clement's character, which is good to see him. I love Jermaine
did he
Clement,
live?
but I think he lives in one of the best violent scenes in the movie.
Right.
The whale that's the outcast, known for being a killer. So it's really good build up. You're like, oh yeah, we're going to see a fight at the end. It's going to be great. He finally gets to the ending and he fights. And there's a whaler that he kills. Oh, he might not be dead, which would be cool to see him come back and then they have another fight again. Maybe he gets his other arm gone. But he gets his in this sequence. There's basically whalers and then a scientist who studies the whales that they're killing. And he's not super into the fact that they're getting killed, but he recognizes for his project he needs it. And with that in mind, he probably won't die because he's more innocent. And yeah, we get a great scene where her arm gets ripped off in a PG-13 movie with blood. It's great.
Right.
In 3D.
Chomping on popcorn.
Really
Got my money's worth now. No kidding.
But yes, you were specifically going there, like, there's not a whole lot of... it's like still 30 minutes because this movie's long, but there's not a whole lot of sciencey conflict in this film.
No.
Are you thinking that in the third one we might get a little more? Because the first one has a lot of science stuff.
Yeah. Because there's that whole group of scientists who stayed behind in the first movie, and we get to see how they've, built up this harmonious relationship, and then Earth starts to show up.
Yeah.
And we see that, 1 year later, there's a little bit more of this resistance going on. And some of, if not all of those scientists have become part of that resistance. So they're out there with their trailers and their masks and their avatars, and they're part of the fight. So you got those guys, but their role seems kind of small after the initial opening scenes. And so I think we might see more of them come back, maybe even tragically.
Yeah, I'm impressed, first off, that this movie so successfully continues from the first film.
Yeah.
A big worry about sequels that come out pretty late is how do they, I like to say it this way, how do they converse with the previous film? You don't need to remake the first film. You don't ever pull a Force Awakens because this is not a good choice in my opinion. But how are you going to talk back with the previous film? That's why a sequel can be antithetical to the first and still be good and within tone, because it might be responding negatively to the previous film. It could be a criticism, and I find that interesting. And here it's a film where the first film is Jake Sully becoming the Avatar into the Na'vi, and it finalizes with that. This second film is kind of a continuation where now as a family unit, they are different and they're separate and they're outcasts, but they are integrated into the Na'vi and they have to kind of reintegrate again into a different community and culture. And without the film having human races in it, they do embrace some really interesting science fiction displays of racial social commentary, which is all quite simple because it's not the purpose of the film, but it's really good. And it continues that conversation of integration, community, and stuff like that, all within the confines of really, like, I guess, I don't know. I think they all worship Awa. I couldn't remember if the water people did too, but they at the very least nature, but Awa as well. And I'm really interested to see if the third film is going to have more Awa stuff. I'm sure Kiri is going to be really important. I mean, I think Kiri is on the poster of the film.
Oh, wow.
I think that's the silhouette that's like half of her face. I think Kiri's their lead in that respect. So I'm really interested to see more of that. And I gotta say, I'm extremely interested to see more Quaritch. I think Quaritch is the standout character in this film. I think he is stunning, interesting, compelling. Part of what makes the ending so thrilling, there's a three-way standoff basically amongst families.
Yes.
And it's harsh. It is a harsh sequence. Neytiri has gone full monster mode. It's very scary. I mean, Quaritch has been with a whole team of avatars the whole film, and Neytiri knocks them out one by one. Not even a struggle. I'm really excited to see how they continue with this third, but I agree. I think it's going to be something big. It's going to be maybe like multiple tribes. I don't know if we're going to would we have time to introduce more tribes, or would it just be forest people and water people?
They'll probably do at least one more because you've got the cliff dwellers, I believe, right? If I
Yeah,
remember
what
the
was
first
in the
movie.
first one? There's like a scene where they interact with other tribes.
Yes.
I know they interact with other tribes because they're going to do the final fight at some point in that film. And I feel like there was like a desert clan
Oh wow.
or something like that. So yeah, I don't know.
I may have to watch the first one all over again just for that scene.
Hey, don't forget, there's a lot of fun content missing from this episode because you're not listening on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and support for $3 a month to gain access to uncut episodes with upwards of 40 minutes of bonus content each. You'll thank me later. We did forget to mention the Disney World location of Pandora Land or Avatar, whatever it's called, I forget, is canon to the world and is technically set after 3 in which an armistice is reached. So we at least know that's in the future. But what do you suspect will get us there? What do you think is going to happen in this third film? Then? Or what do you want, really?
Lots of Pyrrhic victories. I don't know. It's a Disney kind of franchise, right? Like they bought New Line Cinema.
Oh, you mean with 20th Century? Does 20th Century have New Line? I don't remember. But I digress.
Disney has 20th Century, though. Yeah.
Yes.
So they own the studio. But there's that alignment, though, because knowing that Flight of Passage and that whole world of Pandora at Walt Disney World, my favorite park, Animal Kingdom, is canon. That gives me some reassurance that there is going to be peace. So I love that part. But there are things that we don't see, like who made it, like who makes it out of this story.
Yes.
And, that kind of peace that's lasting. I mean, you go through some hardships to get there. Just from seeing, the storyline when you're in the queue for Flight of Passage, there's this deep appreciation for each other where both humanity and the Na'vi see each other and they see each other as partners.
Interesting.
And so I'm curious to see what happens in the third movie to help get us closer to that.
Yeah, what the heck?
Right?
That's a lot. I didn't know it was that detailed. Wow.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, it's Disney World. The queues are as much part of the attraction as the ride itself.
The experience, yeah.
And as you get deeper and deeper and closer to the actual ride or experience, you're going through some cave systems. So you get to see so maybe there's some cave dwelling tribes, by the way. So you see cave drawings, you see some evidence of, human touches in with this. Then as you get closer to the attraction, you're at the exterior of those huts that they use for the mobile labs. So you start to get to the exterior of that. There's a lot of growth. And then you get inside and it's an actual working lab. And then before you know it, you're getting ready for the attraction. And this is just a normal thing that we let human tourists go through this Flight of Passage and, with the Banshees, the Ikran. And so you get a little bit of a taste of why that's so important to the Na'vi. And then you experience it. And it's just like mind blowing. In fact, there are creatures that you see in Flight of Passage that you never really see before, but then they show up.
Interesting.
Yeah, like the whales, I think, are in the attraction.
Okay.
And I was like, because when I saw it in theater, I was like, I've seen those.
That's awesome.
That's
actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
I love that correlation.
They've already connected those dots. And so maybe a little spoiler there. There are some whales who make it. Yeah.
Well, then I guess that's what makes me so curious then for this world as it develops, because we have, 5 of these movies 4 of them have been in development for, 10 years, over 10 years. And there are suspicions for a 4th and 5th. I'm saying that just because I'm curious if plans will change depending on how this movie does. I'm not entirely surprised if this movie doesn't make the goals it's trying to make. I think the budget was literally they don't reveal entirely, but you can add marketing suspicions and stuff. $600 million to make and market. So this movie needs a lot of money. And the franchise technically is still profitable. That first movie makes a lot of money. And it is only the first weekend. We're going into Christmas. People are going to have a lot of free time and people will probably rewatch this movie. I know I would like to. I specifically am asking people if they've seen it yet to find out when they're going so I can go again.
There you go.
And I definitely want to go.
I think they said they need to make $2 billion at the box office to break even.
Okay, good luck.
Forgot where I saw that headline.
We need to dominate the first films, but like revenue, just
Right?
to do it again.
Where did I see it?
I mean, hey, James Cameron keeps doing it, so I guess it works. But he keeps making these franchises so valuable, except for Piranhas. I guess that didn't work out. But
That's such a shame too. Okay.
Did you know Cinematic Doctrine has a blog? Visit cinematicdoctrine.com to read extended thoughts on movies or movie industry news from our contributors. Plus, you can find our podcast on there too. Well, I think it's fair to say we both recommend Avatar: The Way of Water. If you sat through spoilers, of course they're all light, but you can still tune into the movie and I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. No, you don't need to take a potty bag with you. It is nice and well paced. You'll be all right. Just don't drink coffee before you go. Jerry, where can people get to your podcast before we get into recommendations?
The home that houses it all is my website, beyondtherut.com. There you'll find links to the episodes are there on the website. My social media links are there. And I mean, if you don't want to go to that website, if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I don't know, Pocket Casts, anything that plays a podcast, you will typically find that there. Beyond the Rut with Jerry Dugan. Very
cool. So do you want to start us off on our recommendations and I'll close this out?
Yeah. We were talking about a friend of ours, Chris Starrin. He's the host and producer behind Truce Podcast. Highly recommend that show to anybody, especially if you're curious about Christianity as it clashes with the modern world. So what are the things that we hold on traditionally in Christianity that we probably should think about and question? So it's just really neat. I mean, he tackles things like multi-level marketing systems. He tackles the Snopes trial. Fundamentalism is the one he's taking on right now in this current season. So a lot of work being done. I'd love to see this guy monetize his show and not have to drive a school bus anymore. Just a very talented guy, very insightful, puts a lot of work into every single episode. I might be a little biased because I do some voiceover work for him for that show.
As do I.
It'll just be neat to see him be able to hire some actual talent, because I'm running out of accents and voices to do for those characters. So check that out, the Truce Podcast. And I think you can find them on thetrucepodcast.com, as well as any platform that shows and shares podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm going to recommend a movie I watched recently that as I was watching it, I just audibly went, this is one of the best movies I've ever watched. And it might not be what you're expecting, and you may have heard of it before. It's called Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon by Michael Schultz. It is a great movie. There's some history behind it. It's one of basically Motown was fading out. Berry Gordy wanted to get into another field to help kind of market it, and so he made this movie. It is a martial arts movie with like very heavy Motown stuff in it. There's literally just a music video from one of the artists. I think the name was DeBarge. I don't know. I was born in 95. So, but I did like the song. And it is super funny. It is super clever. It is very, if you're a fan of Hollywood, New York, it is very Hollywood, New York, like movie New York. It's just great. It's constantly giving. You will laugh super hard. You will have really good thrills. The visuals are extremely fun. I just thought this was amazing. I thought it was super good, and I can't wait to. I found it on like a DVD, like at a thrift store, as I always do, and I can't wait to find the Blu-ray. I know it got re-released like 3 years ago, with a bunch of special features. It is awesome. I'll have, of course, a link on Just Watch, so you can find out where it's streaming. I think it's on HBO Max. I don't know. But if not, you can probably rent it because it's got that re-release. So, yeah. But in the meantime, Jerry, thank you so much for coming on to this episode of the podcast. Thanks for making time, so many hours to watch Avatar and then come on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, show enough.
Yes, yeah, he's the best part of the movie. It's so good.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Cinematic Doctrine. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. And as mentioned before, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss on the podcast. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/cinematic doctrine. A special shout out to those who support at the Art House Theater tier on Patreon. Thank you so much, Mom, Dad, Melanie, Shirley-Ann, and Thomas. You guys are the best, and your continued monetary support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, stay cool. Want some Cinematic Doctrine swag? You're in luck! We've got 3-inch Cinematic Doctrine logo stickers exclusive for Patreon supporters. Perfect for your travel mug or laptop. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine, link in the show notes, and choose the Independent Theater tier. Doing so will net you other perks too. But let's be real, the podcast stickers are the coolest perk. So get yourself some podcast stickers by supporting on Patreon.